You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, as promised, we are going to turn to Wisconsin because it's a state that just cannot keep out of the news. And of course, I'm talking to Dan Shafer, the veteran Milwaukee journalist who publishes the weekly independent column, The Recombobulation Area. And you guys know him. He's been on the show before. He helps us understand that really important state. Dan, welcome back.
Hey, Edwin, thanks so much for having me on the show. Glad to be back.
So I am confident for the first time about Wisconsin. I am an optimist about Wisconsin probably for the first time. I think the people in your state aren't crazy. They're not at all. And they're going to just say to Speaker Voss, hey, you know what? You dissed us when we elected a governor by taking away his power before he could get there. And you're trying to diss us again by not letting the person we elected to the Supreme Court be on the Supreme Court. You can't just say we can have elections when your guy wins. Stop it. And I just feel like the good people of Wisconsin have had it with this nonsense. That doesn't mean it's going to stop, though. Tell us what's going on.
Yeah, so the latest chapter in the ongoing, kind of political turmoil that we've had in Wisconsin is what's happening this week when things have really ratcheted up around the threat from longtime Republican Assembly Speaker Robin Voss to impeach the newly elected state Supreme Court Justice Janet Protasiewicz, who, of course, won a landslide 11-point victory to tip the balance of the court to be a 4-3 liberal majority when she won in April. She was seated in August. One of the first cases that is going to be before this court, one of the biggest high-profile cases is going to be about redistricting. There was a case filed almost immediately after Protasiewicz was seated, and throughout the campaign, she had made many comments about how the maps in the state are rigged, which I would characterize as a factual statement, because if you look at the way the state legislative maps are in Wisconsin, they are so overly tilted to Republicans. They have almost a 2/3 supermajority in a state where, it's about the most 50-50 purple state that we have anywhere in the country. And so an obvious challenge was going to come for these maps. And now what's happening is Republicans want her to recuse from this case surrounding the maps and are threatening to use those gerrymandered majorities in the state legislature to impeach her. They're threatening to impeach her before she has even heard a case. There was actually some in the state legislature who were threatening to impeach her before she was even elected. So this type of behavior, is not exactly surprising coming from this group of Wisconsin Republicans who, as you said, in 2018, used the lame duck session after Tony Evers beat Scott Walker to strip him of his powers. After the 2020 election, when Joe Biden beat Donald Trump, they held hearings and launched investigations into the election, ultimately finding nothing. And so this is just kind of a pattern of behavior of undermining and trying to invalidate elections from Republicans who seem to have this guiding principle of only Republicans are allowed to govern in the state of Wisconsin, no matter how many statewide elections that they lose.
Yeah. So, Dan, this is why I'm more optimistic. Not because I think they won't try, they may even succeed in getting the votes in the legislature to impeach. Is it judge or justice when you're in the Supreme Court at the state level?
Justice Protasiewicz.
Okay. Yeah. To impeach Justice Protasiewicz. Look, nothing she said in the campaign trail was a secret. The conversation about the maps in Wisconsin is the most important political conversation in the state, has been for a long time. It's the most gerrymandered state in the country. Not surprising somebody would talk about that. Similarly, abortion was a big issue, and it was talked about as well because you got a law from the 1800s, right, which may or may not be constitutional. Voters understood all of that and voted her in. And this will now be the third time that Speaker Voss has said, I'm the guy with power. I'm going to step in and they when they redid the powers of the governor, it was outrageous, but people let it go. When he hired a former Supreme Court guy, Michael Gableman, to run that clown car of an investigation into 2020, it ended up biting him in the ass, right? It was so bad, and the public saw it. He finally ended up having to fire Gableman, who endorsed Voss's opponent. I mean, that's how bad they are. And now he's doing it a third time. I mean, I just think people in Wisconsin are going to say, look, you don't get to decide. This is what voting's all about. And if he succeeds in impeaching her, I think the state will overwhelmingly throw these people out. Aren't people furious?
I think people are, and I think Voss is really playing with some fire here, in terms of how this could backfire, on Republicans. And I think you're right that the approach he's taken, basically since Republicans started to lose power in 2018, has been really damaging. It's caused a lot of political turmoil. And I think voters have, had reelected Tony Evers last fall. I think he was more of a steadying presence in state politics than the chaos and political turmoil of Robin Voss. But I think the thing is, the maps are so gerrymandered, and the way that the separation of powers works in the state of Wisconsin is that the state legislature is incredibly powerful, and they have used their gerrymandered majorities to continue to consolidate power within the state legislature. So even though Democrats and Democratic-backed candidates have won 14 of the last 17 statewide races in the state of Wisconsin, Republicans still are holding a lot of the cards in terms of how the levers of government, or who controls the levers of government in the state. So even though Voss is deeply unpopular in the state, he had only a 12% favorability rating the last time the Marquette University Law Poll pulled this, that he holds a tremendous amount of power in the state because of these maps. The maps are the skeleton key to keeping power, no matter how many statewide elections that they lose. So, they are going to stop at nothing to protect those maps, because those maps are the key to everything for them. And, this is a state that is often 50-50 in elections. It's a state that elected Tony Evers and Ron Johnson on the ballot last fall. But at the same time, we now have a 2/3 supermajority in the state Senate and a 64-35 majority in the state assembly. So they are going to do whatever they can to maintain those huge majorities so that they continue to control the levers of power of government in the state.
Yeah, I think they'll do everything they can. But increasingly, as they lose popular support, they will do things that ordinary people think are crazy. And I think about, war. The worst war crimes are always committed by a side that is still very strong, but worried that they're losing. And that is what we're seeing in Wisconsin. I just don't think the people are going to play. What does the business community in the state think? They can't want to operate in a lawless a state where the only thing that matters is power, where there isn't really rule of law. That cannot be something the business community there supports.
Yeah, I think, the business community in Wisconsin is still very right wing. And I think, this is they are often will stay on the sidelines and keep their voices out of it when this type of chaotic behavior comes down from the Republicans, because they often are backing them in a lot of ways. But I think, one thing to consider with this and the way that this could backfire is that, obviously we've got the 2024 election right around the corner here, and Milwaukee is hosting the Republican National Convention. So Wisconsin is going to be host to the big party that the Republicans are going to be throwing next year. This is a really important state for them to need to win, with the convention being here, with this being the tipping point state in the last two presidential elections. I think this is poisoning the well for the way people perceive the modern Republican Party in the state as well. We also have a situation, Tammy Baldwin is going to be running for a re-election, a very popular U.S. senator who was elected by a double-digit margin in 2018. There's still no candidate running against her for the Republicans. So it's not only this disarray, within the legislature and these chaotic, extreme moves of trying to impeach a recently elected judge. It's the whole party is kind of been upended in recent years, and they really have been on a strange trajectory, kind of the infighting over, the support of Trump or the support of, the things like you mentioned, the Gableman investigation and all the election denial type of activity. So I think, it's not just the risking things like losing the governorship like they did last fall. It's going to play into next year's presidential election. And if the redistricting case goes forward, one of the key elements of it is that they not only wanted to, potentially have elections, under new maps for the way that, we would most traditionally have elections here where all 99 members of the state assembly and half of the state senate is up every 2 years. They're trying to redo these maps so that every last member of the Wisconsin state legislature would be on the ballot under new maps by 2024. So if, one of the things that the state Democrats are doing, they're trying to take every last member of the Wisconsin Republican legislative caucus to task on this and find out where they stand. There was actually some interesting news late yesterday when one kind of more moderate Republican assembly member put out a press release saying, I'm not on board with this impeachment talk. He was somebody who actually kind of bucked his party in the during the Gableman investigation and all these election denier activities. So he, has come out and said, hey, I didn't vote for Janet Protasewicz. She's not the person I would support, but she won the election and we have to live with the results. That's, it's one guy being the adult in the room.
I saw it. He's in the
side. But, it'd be interesting to see if we see more of them, come out of the woodwork in the weeks to come, because I don't think the support is there across the board for what Robin Vos wants to do in Wisconsin this time.
Well, I know Democrats are raising a lot of money to make sure that Robin Vos's latest attack on the votes of people in Wisconsin doesn't fly under the radar screen. I mean, everybody's going to have to stand up and take a side, and I don't think anybody can hide on this one.
Yeah, I think, that was one of the things they put out this campaign called Defend Justice. It's like a $4 million effort. But I think one of the most interesting pieces of it is go to that website. You can see where every last member of the Wisconsin state legislature stands. So, of course, you have all of the Democrats in the legislature who are against impeachment. You have, now one Republican who is against impeachment. And then, most of the legislature has not been on the record yet. They've been kind of hiding behind Robin Vos on this issue and haven't themselves necessarily been on the record. And one thing interesting that I've been hearing on this is that, in the assembly, Robin Vos kind of runs the show. So I think a lot of the Republicans will line up behind him there. If they were to vote to impeach Protasewicz, it would be a simple majority vote. So even if, like the guy I mentioned who yesterday said he wouldn't impeach, if they lost a few more votes like that, they would still be able to vote to impeach with the huge gerrymandered majorities they have. But in the Senate, it requires a 2/3 majority vote. They have those votes. They do have a 2/3 supermajority, but from what I'm hearing is there is far from consensus among the Senate members on this. And I think if we hear one member of the Wisconsin State Senate who would come out and say that they don't support impeachment, well, that could really put the brakes on this whole effort. And I think that would really go a long way to show is that, they could impeach her in the assembly, but then the Senate could vote it down. So I think that is an interesting thing to consider too, as we look ahead to what the potential outcomes could be of this impeachment effort.
Yeah, what happens? Here's a scenario somebody talking about scared me to death, where the House impeaches and the Senate takes its sweet time and doesn't do anything.
Yeah, this is this scenario was presented in a piece by Patrick Marley of the Washington Post. He was a longtime Milwaukee Journal Sentinel reporter, and he kind of laid out this scenario that could go forward where the Assembly would vote to impeach with a simple majority vote, and then the Senate could just kind of delay any vote on that. So, they would need the 2/3 majority to vote to impeach Protasewicz. But at the same time, they don't have to schedule that vote. So they would kind of, once the assembly votes to impeach with that simple majority, that would sideline Protasiewicz from any of her judicial duties. She would not be able to, actively be a judge on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. So I think that is key, and I think that is a really likely potential outcome, considering the way Robin Vos operates. Is just to kind
the law
of keep
doesn't
that in limbo
require that she have a speedy trial.
Gridlock scenario. I'm sorry.
There's no speedy trial requirement for her in the Senate. They don't have to take this up right away.
From what I understand, and I mean, there are a lot of moving pieces around this, and there's some timing issues that we could get into as well. But I think, that there might be some legal challenges to that if they do decide to leave her in limbo. I'm still trying to learn more about that, though, and I'm not quite sure exactly what the outcome could be. But basically, I think the big issue with that is that if they do delay, that would mean that the case for the redistricting might be they might not be able to get new maps by 2024. So there's already kind of a tight timeline, on whether or not they would be able to, get new maps. If the case that goes forward, if they rule on the side of the liberal law firm Law Forward that is bringing this case forward, and bring new maps. Well, it's still a pretty tight timeline to do that because we need new maps basically by March or April in order to, have the candidates know which district they're going to be in, collect appropriate signatures, all of that. So I think, there's already a tight timeline, and if there's any delay, like this limbo situation that has been put forward, that could jeopardize any ability to get new maps, fair maps, by 2024.
If Janet Protasiewicz, and she doesn't deserve this, if she resigns, if she says to Robin Vos, you've had your say, I'm having mine, I resign, what happens?
There's a couple different scenarios with that, and again, I'm still trying to learn the exact specifics of the details, but I think there is a real timing issue with that, because if she were to resign before December 1st, that would kick in a scenario where there would be an election on the next spring, so next April, in the spring election. Spring is when Wisconsin has its nonpartisan elections. So in addition to, any judicial elections, it's mayors, county executives, city councils, things like that will be on the ballot next spring. So that is when, but if she resigns after December 1st, that would kick in a scenario where Tony Evers could appoint a replacement, and that replacement could potentially be on the court for several years before another election would happen there. So it's a very, very tricky situation. Lots of moving parts, lots of confusion, and it has, absolutely upended political conversation in Wisconsin right now. And there's also some really big issues that the state is trying to tackle. There's a big tax reform package that's working its way through the state legislature, and the governor has called a special session on child care after the.
You have a child care crisis in your state. You have a real child care crisis.
Yeah, we absolutely do. And Republicans voted out $340 million for child care out of the state budget in a 2:30 a.m. session. And so the governor is trying to bring that funding back so that, that funding is jeopardizing whether or not about 25% of the child care providers in the state will be able to stay open. So there are some real pressing issues that we need to get to in the state, and this impeachment talk is really derailing our ability to kind of come to find a solution here. It's really unfortunate.
Okay, well, look, the signal to this radio station reaches the southern corner of your state, but I'm not the only one doing this. So let me say to everybody in Wisconsin, all those state legislators in Wisconsin, you cannot hide. The entire country is going to come down on you for this. You cannot hide. There will be media from all over the nation looking at you, asking you in front of your children whether you give a damn about American democracy, whether you care about the voters in Wisconsin. Better think about that. I'm sorry, Dan. This is, it's a bridge too far, and I don't believe the people of Wisconsin support it, and I know the people of the country are going to be appalled. And it's all coming, and you're going to have a front row seat to all of this.
Well, you're absolutely right. Wisconsin always seems to be right in the middle of these, big political fights that are happening around the country, and this just seems like the latest version of it. You're right, though. It is beyond ridiculous. It is infuriating that this has to happen because people worked so hard to flip that Supreme Court. That was an effort that was years in the making. It really goes back to, in 2017, there was a Republican or a conservative leaning justice who ran unopposed for re-election. And I think that was a real wake-up call that the Democrats and liberals in the state were not paying attention to the court. So this was 2018, they flipped a seat. In 2019, there was a contentious election. 2020, they flipped another seat. So this was years and years in the making to set up this scenario, where we could have an election like we did last spring, where people got really activated. More than 1 million people voted in a spring off-year election to bring change to the highest court in the state of Wisconsin, to try to bring change to the dynamics of state politics here, and to immediately try to undo that within the first 6 weeks of Protasewicz' time on the court. It's so ridiculous. And I think, I feel like we're trying to, we're hoping the fever will break, but at the same time, it's just every time it seems like we break through on something, there's another setback. So it's
no bottom to what they won't do to try and hold on to power. But look, this is their third time to tell voters they don't matter. And it comes after that clown show of a Republican debate that was in Milwaukee, recently. This might rally their hard base, but it will never expand it. It will never expand it. And you're right to say to them all, hey, you got a convention coming, and you're going to have, like all of Chicago standing outside the convention protesting. This is really what you want?
Well, and I think if this doesn't work for them, if this gamble doesn't pay off, they're going to have, every member. One of the things that I do at the Recombobulation area is I preview every last seat, every last election in the Wisconsin state legislature, and I have to imagine in my preview next year that I will be referencing where exactly people stand on this issue of impeachment. Democrats are, of course, wanting to put people on the record. There's been a lot of media conversations going on in the last week trying to ask leadership and other members where they stand. And I think this is going to be something that voters remember. This was such a big deal for the state to flip the balance of power in the court. We don't often get an 11-point victory in this state. This wasn't just to squeak by. This was a mandate for change in the state of Wisconsin, and I think people will remember that next fall, and people will remember the chaos and turmoil that this impeachment threat has unleashed. And I think, Robin Vos has been the longest-serving assembly speaker in his history of the state of Wisconsin. And boy, would we like to see him get out of that seat. Obviously he comes from a very Republican district and all of that, but he's been in leadership so long. People are just absolutely tired of his antics, running things from the state legislature. And sooner or later, you hope he is headed to the exits.
We had a Democrat with similar ideas about power in our state who ran the state legislature forever, a man named Mike Madigan. He has relinquished his last piece of power just recently, not even running for political committeeman spot, and he will be on trial for corruption charges in the coming months. So, state-level corruption is not partisan. But the idea that you will use the power you have to deny voters the opportunity to have any meaningful say in a democracy is unique. And it's unique to the modern Republican Party, and it's fully on display in Robin Vos. And Dan, journalists from all over the country are going to be looking to you, and they're going to be looking at the Recombobulation area to say, like, where is this guy standing? Because they're going to want to interview every one of them at this enormously important moment.
Yeah, it's a lot to. Sorry, I think you cut out for a second there. Did you have a question?
I wanted to thank you because everybody in the country is going to want to hold the people accountable who say your votes don't count. We're at that point where it's no longer necessary to tell Americans that they're, what we're up against. We're now trying to figure out what to do about it. And one of the things we're going to do about it is take every single person who is trying to steal the right of votes to matter and hold them to account. So, your reporting is going to help the whole country know who to blame, who's responsible.
Well, I appreciate that. And,
really
that has
important.
been one of the issues that I've been writing a lot about these last few years, about just the issues of democracy, the issues of voting rights, and the issues of trying to overturn and undo these elections. It's such a big deal. It's so important for our foundation of our government in the state and the way things operate. The gerrymandering issue is one that I've written a lot about at the recombobulation area as well. That's part of the preview series that I do. And just one of the things that I was thinking back to, I covered the one public hearing that there was about the newly introduced maps. And we had the maps that were adopted in 2011 after Scott Walker won and the Republicans won the trifecta. Those were widely known as the most gerrymandered maps in the country. There were federal rulings saying that they are deeply gerrymandered and block people from representation. But they, instead of trying to moderate, instead of trying to do something different, they pushed things just that much further. And they took a map that was already deeply gerrymandered and tried to draw themselves a path to a supermajority where they would be able to overturn the governor's veto. This is something that warps representation ultimately for hundreds of thousands of people in the state. We have a situation where more than 60%. There's been more than 60% of the seats that in the assembly that the Republicans hold. And again, this is a 50-50 state. The Republicans will like to say, well, all the Democratic voters are just in Milwaukee and Madison. Well, there's a lot of people that live in Milwaukee and Madison, and for one, and for also there's Democrats that represent, a lot of the mid-sized towns throughout the state of Wisconsin: Beloit, Eau Claire, La Crosse, Oshkosh. You have all of these kind of, between 30 and 60,000 person towns across Wisconsin that have Democrats representing them in the state assembly and the state senate. So it's not just the two cities, as they always like to say. It is really spread out in a lot of different ways. College towns, mid-sized markets, kind of old manufacturing towns across the state. And, I think it really dilutes that representation and it really, warps politics in a lot of ways. There's so many different issues where Wisconsin is on an island compared to its Midwestern neighbors, whether it's Medicaid expansion, marijuana legalization, gun rights. There's so many different things you go through the list that Wisconsin is just becoming way behind the times on, especially as our Midwestern neighbors in Minnesota and Michigan and Illinois continue to move forward on so many key issues. And Wisconsin is just, it just feels like we're stuck in the mud on these things. And then the foundational elements of those basic democracy and basic representation, that's how it translates to those big issues.
Well,
I think
you're absolutely right,
fix the foundation, we're not going to be able to tackle those big issues.
You're right. They go hand in hand. A government that's not accountable, and in our system of government, it's democracy and voters that hold the government accountable. And if the government isn't accountable because they have managed to rig the democracy, you're going to see bad results. That's just the way it is. Well, listen, we've run out of time, Dan. Again, thank you so much for all of the work to keep us and the whole country to help us understand the threat that's happening and also the organization to oppose it. So really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on and for your passion on these issues. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
You bet. All right, everybody. Dan Shafer, veteran and talented Milwaukee journalist. You could find his work at the recombobulation area. We're going to take a break for the news. And when we turn back, we will head to the courts with Jill Wine-Banks. Stay tuned.